the TARDIS was hurtling through the space-time vortex, having just left Newcastle and Rani behind. Cassidy's whole world had been shaken, almost as much as the TARDIS was shaking, as it flew uncontrollably through space and time. The Doctor and Cassidy were in the control room of the TARDIS, desperately holding on to the handles on the console, as the Doctor frantically was pulling levers and smashing buttons in an attempt to pilot the TARDIS. "Are you sure this is your TARDIS? You don't seem to be able to pilot it very well," Cassidy yelled, her voice distorted by the whirlwinds of the TARDIS, dragging her back and forth. "Believe me, this is as steady as it gets," the Doctor replied as they spun a small circular wheel, grinding the TARDIS to a halt. Cassidy and the Doctor fell to the floor after their impact. The Doctor was the first to get up, slowly pulling themselves up by pulling the TARDIS console. Cassidy sat upright on the TARDIS floor and looked towards the door. There seemed to be rain falling outside the window. They must have moved. It hardly seemed credible. But then again, nothing in the last day had seemed credible. "Where are we?" Cassidy asked sharply as she got off the floor. "Well," they replied as they reached for the scanner attached to the console. They banged it lightly to get it to display a picture. "It looks like some kind of forest," they suggested. The picture displayed quite a wet forest, perhaps in autumn, although the image was pixelated. Cassidy moved towards the door. Outside that door could be anywhere, she thought, as she edged closer, staring at the handle to pull the door open. The Doctor had moved behind them, desperately waiting for Cassidy to open the door. "It won't bite, you know," they said. "To be fair, how am I supposed to know that? It could, for all I know," Cassidy replied before finally pulling the door open. Cassidy reached out her hand to feel the rain drip onto her hand. She couldn't believe it. They really had moved, although this clearly was Earth and not an alien planet like she'd hoped. The Doctor, growing impatient, barged past Cassidy and out into the rain. They looked out to the sky. "By the looks of it, we're on Earth," they said, getting their face soaked in the rain droplets falling from the sky like bombs. The trees seemed to be everywhere, like spies looking in and staring right at Cassidy. Doctor picked up a decaying leaf off the ground and took a small nibble out of it. 1590s by the taste of this leaf. Cassidy retched in disgust as she finally exited the TARDIS and closed the door behind her. This was when Cassidy finally noticed. "Hey, Doc, where's the rest of it?" she said, looking around the sides of the blue police box. "What do you mean?" the Doctor asked. "Well, look," said Cassidy, presenting the box like some kind of grand prize. The Doctor looked at the TARDIS with intense confusion. It seemed to have changed subtly. It looked more retro, with a flat roof and bigger light which glowed dimly in the forest. The familiar St. John's ambulance logo was now imprinted on one of the panels, while the base seemed a lot thinner and the overall box seemed taller. However, other than that, it seemed like the same old TARDIS to them. "I don't see what you're getting at," they replied. "Seriously?" said Cassidy with a raised eyebrow. "It's bigger on the inside." "Oh, I thought we'd done that bit," said the Doctor. "No, this is so out of this world, so incredible, so an amazing feat of technological advancement." "Stupid," said Cassidy, looking at the Doctor. "Stupid," they said in a raised tone. "She's a technological marvel," they said, moving in to comfort the TARDIS by patting it on the side. "I don't listen to her, old girl. That's another thing. Why do you act like it's alive? It's a machine," Cassidy said bluntly. "She is," they snapped back at her. Cassidy snapped the door shut. "You truly are the strangest person I've ever met," Cassidy said as they began to walk together into the woods. "Well, that's not a very original observation," they stated as they soon were immersed in the mist of the dark forest. Elsewhere in the woods there was a dark presence. A local villager was tending to her fire and roasting an animal on a large stick which they were using as a spit. Meanwhile, her two children were playing at being knights by a tree near the grove. She watched her two children as they mucked about gleefully. That's when she realised she had some herbs that she'd picked out whilst on a stroll in the forest that day. She thought it would go nicely with the lamb she was cooking, so she went inside her hut to fetch it. As she did so, the two children ran off into the forest with their sticks for swords, clashing with a dramatic crack with each move. By one of the trees, there was a large root, which one of the children tripped over on. They were isolated. The mist seemed thicker than they had before. One of the children was about to call for help when suddenly a hand reached out for them from behind. This had been thickly coated in hot, sticky, crimson-red blood, which slowly dripped from its sharp, yellowed claws. The claw reached in and butchered the children as though they were a woodland beast. When the woman returned from her hut to find the children missing, all for a stick which had blood sprayed right up it, she let out a painful screech of agony at the loss of her children. Not too far away, the Doctor and Cassidy had been strolling through the woods, and they had heard the woman's screams, and thus they ran to her aid. "Hello, is anybody there? We heard screams," the Doctor yelled as they ran on to the scene. Cassidy followed after them, worrying what terror could be at the end of the screams. The Doctor found the woman on the floor, screaming amongst floods of tears. Cassidy reached in to try and comfort the woman by sitting beside her. The Doctor, mystified by what had happened, introduced themselves. "Hello, I'm the Doctor. Can you tell me what happened here?" The woman began to choke up on her tears and replied, "Agnes, it's my children." She paused in terror as if a lump was stuck in her throat. The demons took my children." Cassidy and the Doctor went exceedingly quiet. Cassidy took the Doctor aside. "Demons, Doctor? Surely there's no such thing." "Well, I'm open to being proved wrong, but I'd say you're right," they replied, as Agnes continued to cry. This was when a group of 3 rode on by horses, which galloped slowly before them. A royal fanfare was played as they came along the Doctor and Cassidy. Riding on the horses were 2 knights wearing armour made of uncomfortably fitting metal, with a helmet which concealed the faces of both knights. In the middle of the 2 horses rode a rather pompous, weedy-looking earl. He had a rather childlike face, with swept-back hair. He was wearing a large ruff which choked his neck, keeping it upright as he looked down at the Doctor and Cassidy. They wore expensive-looking garment made of red cloth and embroidered with gold string, with patterns of flowers. His trousers reached up to his knees, and obviously had a padded codpiece. His trousers were tucked neatly into his stockings, and he wore simple black shoes. The Earl got off his horse and waved his hands about as he said, "It is I, your Earl, come to save you from these foul miscreants," he proclaimed. "You what, mate?" Cassidy interrupted. "Silence, girl, or I'll threatened the Earl, waving their silk gloves about as their voice got higher and higher, and his cheeks blushing. Cassidy found the Earl a tad ridiculous, a bit pantomime, and smirked herself as the Earl made the fool of himself. Agnes threw herself on the Earl, grabbing onto his legs. The Earl stood upright, finding this an unwanted attention incredibly awkward. "Please do not persist, Herr Peasant. Let me go," he said, hopping around frantically. The Doctor intervened, knocking the Earl over with a Venusian pinch, which caused the peasant to let go of the Earl. The Earl felt a strange tingle consume him when he looked at the Doctor. It made him feel quite mushy on the inside. "Tell us more about these demons, Agnes," Cassidy probed, looking into Agnes's cold, terrified eyes. "It's Satan! Satan has done this!" she replied, quivering over every word. Cassidy got up and looked at the Doctor's eyes. They were tense and unflinching. "Tell me it's not true, Doctor," Cassidy begged. "Well, it's a big universe, and it's better than the alternative," they replied. "Which is?" "That it's someone so bad they don't mind us thinking it's Satan," the Doctor replied, looking right at Cassidy. "We need to find out what this is, and fast." The Doctor and Cassidy began to move and see if they could find something in the forest. The Earl, noticing the Doctor and Cassidy were beginning to make a move, so he tried to find a way to retain the Doctor's attention. "Wait," he said, chasing after them. "Wait," holding up his hand in the air. "What is your name?" he asked the Doctor. "I'm the Doctor. Not that I see it's any concern of yours," they replied. "Doctor who, and just what are you a doctorate in?" "Amongst other things, Lego, pineapple carving, and Taylor Swift," the Doctor replied with a smile. "Doctor, would you do me the esteemed honour of coming to my feast tonight? Hello, the Earl proposed before being cut off by the Doctor. That's a great idea, they replied. Cassidy, you can come too. You'll love these Elizabethan feasts. And you too, Agnes, you need cheering up right now. What a great idea. You know, I really think I badly misjudged you. Please excuse me, said the Doctor, but looking down at their clothes. I must get changed into a more appropriate apparel, they said, dragging Cassidy along back down the direction of the TARDIS. Come along, Cass. Please don't call me that, Cassidy said as she was pulled along viciously. Excuse me, Earl. I too must prepare, Agnes replied. Earl Robert sighed before getting back on his horse to ride back to his castle and prepare for the feast. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Cassidy rushed back off to the TARDIS through the woods. Although Cassidy was being dragged around by the Doctor, she felt a strange malevolent energy coming from the woods. She felt as if something was watching her in the corner of her eye, but when she turned to look, it was gone. They arrived back at the TARDIS and the Doctor let go of Cassidy to put the key in the door. As they did so, Cassidy searched around the area of the box, looking sharply into the hordes of trees surrounding them, almost like perfect masquerade for the evil kept within. She could have sworn she saw a face of some kind of demon. Maybe it was just her imagination overacting, she thought. You coming in? Doctor asked, concerned by the look of fear in Cassidy's eyes. Yeah, just give me a minute, yeah? Cassidy replied as the Doctor went back in the TARDIS. Cassidy kept cautiously towards some dark green ferns on the point of falling apart. She could have sworn there was a creature looming and looking right into her. Cassidy reached out her hand to move away the ferns. Just as she did so, the Doctor came out the TARDIS again. We haven't got long, you know, they said, looking towards Cassidy. Yeah, I'm just coming, Cassidy replied, before following the Doctor back into the TARDIS. In the TARDIS, the Doctor and Cassidy walked past the console room and down a corridor. The corridor was quite dimly lit with roundels carved into wooden panels, which made the TARDIS feel like a grand house in a Hammer horror movie. Are you all right? Asked the Doctor, noticing how quiet Cassidy had become. Sure, replied Cassidy, trying to shrug off the question. Because I know this can be quite overwhelming, the Doctor said, trying to comfort Cassidy. Whatever this Satan thing is, I'm sure it's nothing. It's not that. It's just, when we were out there in the woods, I could have sworn I saw something out there. Something evil, I could just sense it, Cassidy tried to explain. The Doctor, not really knowing how to comfort Cassidy, arrived at the door they were looking for. Ah, here it is, they exclaimed. The door seemed ancient and was covered in symbols, a language almost as old as time itself. The door was made of a mythical green colour, with letters carved and emphasised with a gold shimmer. The Doctor held their hands against the door, almost as if it was a way of being close to home, feeling a weak yet clear link, like sniffing an old shirt of a long-lost relative. They pushed the door and went inside to reveal a room, which was enormous and scattered with clothes of all kinds and eras of the past, present and future. Cassidy stood in amazement, gazing up at the vastness of the wardrobe. Cassidy could see ruffs, robes and gowns. She even saw one of those old Victorian bathing suits, which looked similar to the ones she'd seen one of the Moomins wear on TV. Amongst that, some of the most bizarre clothing choices could be seen, including long scarves and stunning multicoloured coats. There was what looked like a futuristic silver moon boots and Converse shoes strewn across the floor in all kinds of mismatch of pairs. There was even an old dress-up box, which curiously looked quite worn and weathered. It had green hands printed on top of a red background, and was filled with kids' costumes like Disney princess costumes and Scooby-Doo. The Doctor had already run to pick up a corset and went to get changed in a shoji divider, which was covered in Japanese blossoms. Cassidy looked around for about 10 minutes while the Doctor changed. She picked out an old jacket with a flowered pattern on it, which was tied up with a lace. She wore it untied and her shirt below still visible. She traded her worn boots for a pair of buckle shoes, making an almost hybrid modern and Elizabethan-looking outfit. The coat also had a frilly lace collar which hung around the edges of her neckline. Meanwhile, the Doctor had made a much bigger effort to fit in with their historical surroundings. They came out from the shoji in full Elizabethan gown. It was a sunrise yellow ochre colour, with patterns that almost reminded Cassidy of her grandmother's curtains. The dress had a mid-parting in the middle, revealing a silky material underneath. They also had white sleeves which slipped out a puffy ring of material on their shoulders. The white material covered their chest right up to their neckline, where a frilly collar choked their neck. To top it all off, they had picked out a pearl-decorated French hood with the same silky yellow material flowing from the back. "Wow," Cassidy said in amazement. "That's incredible." "You don't think you're a little underdressed?" the Doctor replied, unaware of how insensitive this comment might seem. "Well," Cassidy said, taking a moment to process the Doctor's astonishing look, "it is just dinner." "Yes," said the Doctor before taking Cassidy's arm, "but it's dinner with an Earl. We must dress for the occasion." Cassidy was a little uncomfortable with this show of intimacy so early on in their friendship, so she politely resisted this gesture as they walked out the TARDIS and on their way to the banquet. Elsewhere in the forest, the mist was drawing in, and a storm was brewing on the edge of breaking. Amongst the all-encompassing fog of lost souls, screaming in intense agony, was a single poacher holding on to his rifle for his dear life, alone, scared, isolated. There was more. Just beyond the eye line of the mist, a demonic figure with horns was just about visible through the fog. "Hello? Who's there?" the poacher called out. The poacher felt a strange feeling below his legs, like the ground was moving beneath him, almost like a herd of rabbits had run straight through him. The poacher stumbled to the ground. As he did so, his gun fell from his hands. The poacher frantically searched the ground, looking for his gun, but all he found was a relatively fresh, severed arm of a child. The poacher let out a loud screech. He could hear a voice calling out to him from the mist, the voice of a child. The poacher was terrified, desperately searching for his gun to defend himself. That was when he felt a chilling hand clench his foot tightly, like he'd been caught in a mousetrap. He let out an agonising yelp as he was dragged away into the mist, just inches away from his gun. He pierced his nails in the ground like a cat with sharp claws, desperate not to be picked up by the infant, screaming all the way to his death, echoing throughout the hollow hearts of the trees. Elsewhere, back in the TARDIS, the Doctor was at the console as they carefully negotiated with the controls to get them to Earl Robert's castle on time, while Cassidy watched on peering over their shoulder. The TARDIS landed with a thud. "We're here," the Doctor stated. "I think. Hope you got the same year. I know there's such thing as being fashionably late, but we wouldn't want to be a century too late," Cassidy joked. "Oh, you're right. Hang on. I landed in 1790, not 1560. They replied as they switched the toggle on the TARDIS as it went out of phase for a moment and landed all over again. "There, we're 30 minutes late," they said. "Fashionably late," they continued with a smile. Cassidy ran for the door. "Come on, the food will be getting cold." "Hang on one moment," they stopped Cassidy whilst presenting a phone. "You can introduce me." Cassidy looked down at the phone. It was set for a playlist labelled Elizabethan Beats with a Z. "Come on," said the Doctor, as they hurriedly pushed Cassidy out the doors of the TARDIS. Cassidy stumbled out of the door to a large banquet table stacked pile high with all kinds of poultry, cheeses and bread, and the centrepiece was a roasted peacock, which sat proudly at the centre of the table. Cassidy was being stared down by a whole host of Elizabethan earls and aristocrats. Agnes sat on the sidelines alone, looking a tad out of place, while the servants were tending to the wine while everyone else stood dumbfounded by the mysterious police box which had just materialised out of nowhere in the middle of the banquet hall. Cassidy froze before moving aside of the police box and pressing the shuffle button on the playlist, which let out a sweet-sounding crumhorn melody. "May I introduce the Doctor to TARDIS," she awkwardly stated, before looking downwards as the Doctor elegantly glided out of the TARDIS to roaring applause. "Thank you to our guest of honour for joining us. Who knew you had such great taste in fashion? The Earl said, perspiring slightly as his heart rate increased. Please, take a seat next to me, he said, as he pulled out a seat for the Doctor. The Doctor slowly walked up the table, passing the guests as they did so. Meanwhile, Cassidy took pity on Agnes, who was looking sorrowfully down at her bread and cheese. You okay? She inquired softly as she looked up at the Doctor and the Earl, who seemed to be laughing and sharing a drink together already. Yeah, he doesn't really want me here. I just feel out of place, Agnes replied. You and me both, Cassie said, looking away from the Doctor. You have a look about you, Agnes stated, gazing through into Cassidy. Cassie was confused. What do you mean? She inquired. There's something in you. Something dark. Lost. Chaos. It burns within you. Like an unending blaze of war. Agnes' eyes flamed, and she reflected in her what she saw within Cassidy. Cassidy was taken aback. What are you doing? Agnes choked, as she seemed possessed by some alien force. At this point in the banquet, everyone was staring at Agnes. The faceless demon! She tried to tell Cassidy. Cassidy slammed her hand on the table. He what? As she did so, the whole table began to shake. In front of them, their food transformed into decapitated heads, dripping in blood, which spilled off the plates and onto the white tablecloth. Agnes immediately recognised the head on her plate. It was the plate of her daughter, her eyes as white as mistletoe, her skin as pale as a phantom decaying before her very eyes. In her hair, worms and maggots danced crudely about, flaking off her head and onto her lap, which caused her to fall off her chair and onto the floor. Meanwhile, everyone else retched at the sight of the corpse children's heads on their plates. However, the Doctor remained calm and collected. At the end of the table, Earl Robert was the most repulsed of the lot at the sight of the decapitated poacher, whose head was expressionless before opening his mouth in an eerily wooden manner, like a wooden carved puppet. They all spoke in unison, and they said, I once held the keys above. They cast me out of the land of make-believe and control, but now I pull your strings. Earl Robert looked accusingly into Cassidy's eyes, making Cassidy take a step back in discomfort. Once the heads had stopped talking, they suddenly busted into flames like a matchstick. Once they were nothing but ash, Earl Robert pointed his finger directly at Cassidy. You! Agnes kept her head down, sensing that she had done something very wrong. Earl Robert moved over towards his guards behind him. Arrest her! Arrest the witch! He spat violently at Cassidy. For she is an agent of Satan! Doctor, I think I might need some help over here, Cassidy requested, as the guards approached her and placed her in shackles. The Doctor, who remained calculating in their mind throughout the entire spectacle, finally intervened. Robert, don't you think you're being a bit harsh? I mean, there is no evidence to support the fact that she was responsible for this apparition. I am an expert on these affairs, Doctor. I have a signed copy of Demonology, and I've read it at least 6 times, Robert proclaimed. 6 times? Wow, the Doctor mocked under their breath. Might not tell you that I've been accused as a witch by the man himself, King James. Doctor! Cassidy wailed as the guards took her away. It's all going to be fine, don't worry, the Doctor said as they tried to comfort Cassidy, who had now been dragged away to the banquet hall. Of course, it all makes sense, Earl Robert thought aloud. Look, she's my friend. You've got to help me, the Doctor begged the Earl. The magic box, the Earl said, moving round the table to the TARDIS. You're a sorcerer! The Doctor got their sonic screwdriver out to lock the door to the TARDIS so the Earl couldn't get in, then realised they probably couldn't have done anything worse in this situation. You have a magic wand! There is evil in you, I say, evil! Earl Robert said, gesturing to his guards to lock the Doctor up as well. Wait, hang on 1 hot second. I am a witch finder. They sent me from Her Majesty the Queen herself, the Doctor explained, retrieving their psychic paper and showing it to everyone in the room as a form of ID. And this, pondered the Doctor, looking at their screwdriver, is my Satan scanner. Earl Robert sat back at the table. I knew my day would come. To prove myself to the Queen, he thought to himself. He spoke at last. All right, Doctor. I'll give you a chance. If you can prove the girl's innocence, I will let her live. If you fail to do so by dawn tomorrow, she won't be the only one being burned at the stake. Earl Robert paused for a moment. Might I make a suggestion, then? Go on, Doctor. That we try dunking her instead, they suggested. Earl Robert let out a crude smile. What a fabulous idea, Doctor. I'll have the preparations ready for tomorrow. We should make a party of it. Inform the whole village. Tomorrow, we dunk the witch. Everyone rose from their seats and exited the banquet hall, leaving the Doctor and Agnes alone. Once they were all gone, the Doctor sat down next to Agnes. She buried her head in her arms. Are you okay? I know this banquet was probably more unexpected than anyone could have imagined, they asked Agnes calmly, reaching out for her hand to comfort her. It's just, she said, before looking at the Doctor in the face with her eyes, streaming with tears. It's just that it's all my fault, she said, before moving her hand away from the Doctor and running down the hall. It was strange. The Doctor felt something when near her. It was like they had some kind of connection. They could have sworn they felt a double pulse. But that wasn't possible, surely. They got up, and were against the clock, of course. They had to find a way of saving Cassidy, and quick, so they hopped quickly back in the TARDIS. In the TARDIS, the Doctor made quite a short trip by flicking a few switches. They travelled just downstairs to the dungeons, where Cassidy was being kept. Cassidy was being chained against the wall in a rusty old cell with hay and goodness knows what kind of excrement mixed into it. The walls were made of stone bricks, which seemed moist as water dripped down onto her head. When she saw the TARDIS materialise in front of her eyes from just behind the rusting bars, she moved as closely as she could without being restrained by her shackles. The Doctor burst out the TARDIS. Hi, sorry I'm late, they said. There was an awkward moment of silence that followed this greeting before Cassidy finally broke the ice and said, Well, what's the plan? This, replied the Doctor, making an open gesture. This is the plan. Are you not going to let me out? You know, with that weird zappy thing, she exclaimed, mimicking the Doctor obnoxiously waving their sonic screwdriver about as if it were a magic wand. The Doctor looked immensely insulted by this visual mockery. It's a sonic screwdriver, they stated with a short temper. Yeah, that thing, she said with a sweet yet forced smile to endear the Doctor. Yeah, we're not using it. Why not? It's too simple. We can't just gallivant out this place leaving it in the dark, they explained. Cassidy made a confused facial expression. Sure we can. There is something going on here. Something dark, horrific and completely corrosive at its heart. And you expect me to ignore it? Cassidy felt a spark of shame blaze in her soul. Look, if it makes you feel better, I have got a plan, they stated, acknowledging Cassidy's downturning mood. How good are you at swimming? Not the best. Why? You're going to drown, the Doctor said, handing Cassidy their sonic screwdriver through the bars of the cell. What? You've got to be kidding me, Cassidy said, taking the sonic from the Doctor's hands. Look, use that to free yourself from the docking stall, and then I will park the TARDIS directly underneath, and you can swim inside, the Doctor explained, handing the TARDIS key to Cassidy. Won't that just flood the TARDIS? It won't be the first time, trust me, they replied with an unconvincing smile. It's either this or trial by hot water / iron. Cassidy shivered at the prospect and sighed. Oh, all right, but what am I supposed to do until then? Well, you've got a phone, make a tic-tac or something, I don't know, suggested the Doctor as they made a quick exit in the TARDIS to avoid further argument from Cassidy. It's a tick-tock, she yelled back at the TARDIS as it dematerialised. Cassidy sighed once again before opening the TikTok app on her phone. Great, just fucking wonderful. Making a TikTok in a dungeon in Elizabethan England. What more could I ask for? As the next day dawned, the air was filled with a strange sense of malevolence. Another child had been kidnapped in the night, so tensions were high as Cassidy was taken from her cell to the ducking stall at the top of the tall hill at the centre of the village of Twarbyhurst. Villagers were starting to gather outside and around the lake in which Cassidy was to be dunked in. With no sign of the doctor, Cassidy was starting to grow anxious. As Cassidy reached the top of the hill, she had most of her clothes stripped from her, except her white laced shirt and trousers. She was lucky that she'd managed to keep that sonic screwdriver hidden from the tall, brutish guards, which watched over her as she was chained to the stool, which appeared to be made of an old oak tree. Earl Robert arrived to perform the witch trial wearing a pointy witchfinder hat. He came over to say a few words to Cassidy. "You're lucky, you know. I brought my authentic King James witchfinder hat. I've worn this at countless trials. If you look carefully, you can still see one of his luscious curls." "That's one hell of a crush you've got there," Cassidy thought to herself. "I hope you're ready. Seems your doctor friend is not here. I guess we'll have to start without them," he said as he moved towards the end of the stool, which Cassidy would dunk into the black, soulless water beneath her. Cassidy felt an icy wind chill her to the bone as the mist slowly started to creep in. Cassidy peered into the lake below. She saw the soft, friendly glow of the TARDIS lamp, and then used a tonic to free herself from the chains which kept her tied to the stool. Meanwhile, the Doctor was watching the whole event via the scanner screen inside the TARDIS. They were now wearing a scuba diving outfit and goggles, knowing full well they were about to get soaked. Back outside, the sun seemed to be clouded over, and the fog grew thicker. All around, faint whispers could be heard, almost as if they were calling out to the living souls around them. "What is the meaning of this foul hag?" Earl Robert said as he was beginning to cower in fear as bits of dead body loomed on the surface of the river. Hands, legs, arms and feet all coalescing into one form. Together, like some kind of hybrid. All the limbs were obviously taken from the kidnapped children and poacher, except his face. "I have no idea," Cassidy said, as the face of the horned demon struck an intense sense of fear, which was inflicted upon her like a whip scarring her flesh. "This is one of your illusions. Phantasmagoria, nothing less. I demand that you cease this at once," Earl Robert commanding like a screaming infant. In the TARDIS, the Doctor had examined the entire spectacle, and quickly moved the TARDIS onto the surface and materialised just behind Cassidy and Earl Robert. The demon was sucking up the mist like a tropical storm, and brought hurtling winds and deafening thunder with it. The Doctor exited the TARDIS, now back in their regular attire. Their hat was almost blown away in the wind, however they managed to grab hold of it just in time. "Doctor, it isn't, is it?" Cassidy asked, her eyes consumed by the spectacle before her eyes. "It isn't what?" they asked in reply. "Satan." "I don't know," the Doctor replied, completely overwhelmed. Earl Robert ran to the Doctor and clutched onto them. "Please, save us!" "I demand a sacrifice," the demon spoke at last in a deep, coarse voice, like it had been choked by dirt and sliced with knives. Its once human's hands now grew like thorns into clear claws, which pointed right at Cassidy. "And I demand that it be you," the Doctor yelled. "No, you can't, no!" reaching out to protect Cassidy, but it was too late, as she vanished and the demon with it. The weather returned to normal. Everything seemed calm except for the fury running through the Doctor's veins. "What happened?" Earl Robert inquired at last. "A very big mistake," they replied with great anguish. "Whatever that creature is, wherever it is now, you better watch out, because I'm coming for it, and nothing is going to stop me." "What are you going to do?" "Isn't it obvious? We're going to hell."